This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, Lewitt, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now on the new Lewitt Ray microphone with Aura, Auto Gain, and EQ mode through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic pre, mixed through Isotope, Voice Enhancement Assistant, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
These days, when I'm producing a record, I'm often doing something that's in a genre that includes really, really loud guitars and really loud drums. And I've evolved a technique to record those instruments in a way that gets me consistent results that people like. And liking that includes myself. Like, there's nothing more disappointing than recording an instrument or a band and discovering that you yourself have displeased yourself.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Liz Phair, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey, Rockstar, come on over here. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? Well, my secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off over at isotope.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Liz Phair, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Brad Would, a producer originally from Chicago, Illinois, where he had Idful Music Corporation, a small and mighty recording studio in Wicker Park. There he recorded albums by bands like Seam, Tar, Shrimp Boat, and 11th Dream Day. That's a hard one to say, 11th Dream Day. In 1993, he produced Exile In Guyville for Liz Phair, a very important record which became the catalyst for what became a long and prosperous career as a producer and a mixer. Brad wrapped up in the 90s with many debut albums under his belt, including Sunny Day Real Estate's Diary, Veruca Salt's American Thighs, Placebo's self-titled LP, and Ben Lee's Grandpaw Would. He also notably produced the original broadcast recording for Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Throughout the iconic decade, Brad also worked with bands such as Far, That Dog, Menthol, Pete Yorn, and the Smashing Pumpkins, Adore, which peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200 charts. Later, Brad relocated to Los Angeles, California, where he built Seagrass Studios, and there he's tracked and mixed for Say Anything, Me Without You, The Bangles, Sherwood, Touche Amore, and many other artists. I'm excited to have Brad back on the podcast again. You can catch his first episode with us, RSR95, where he talked about his work in Chicago and moving to LA. In fact, that will be in the show notes in the playlist of Brad's music. Along with the music, we'll have the podcast episode there too. Today, we're going to catch up with Brad to see what's new at Seagrass Studio and talk about producing and mixing in Atmos, among other things. So please welcome back Brad Would to Recording Studio Rockstars. Brad, are you ready to rock for the second time, revealing that I forgot to hit record the first time we started?
I am born ready to rock, even when I'm not awake.
Yeah, right.
Cheers. Here we are.
Thank you for joining us at this ungodly hour of 8 a.m., I think, for you in LA, right?
That's right. It's early. I'm an early riser, but I'm not always an early rocker.
Not always an early rocker. Well, I was thinking it was like, not a very rock and roll time, but you said you start your day early, and we were joking that like time to rock is when you say it's time to rock, pretty much, right?
Pretty much. I mean, as far as volume goes, I don't like to fire it up too much, too early. It's just hard, So a little bit of coffee and some, thinking about rocking. That's better,
That's true. That's true.
Rock
the morning
prep.
time is, maybe we just jump right into this. The morning time is one of these great times to come in and listen to the work from yesterday and just sort of play the mix at a really nice chill volume. Is that part of your process? Do you have sort of a revision process that happens in the mornings?
Sure. If I've done a mix at the end of the day previously, and I have access to it, which means that I've delivered it to clients via MP3, texting, and emailing the link to the Dropbox where I've put it. That means that I'm usually on my morning walk with my AirPods in, listening to what I've just done the night before. Always. Yeah, I'm constantly listening to what I'm working on. It's a curse.
Yeah, I do that too. I remember once hearing Eddie Van Halen is quoted as saying he didn't listen to other music. He just listened to his own records. And somebody was sharing that in the context of like, oh, how, self-centered. And then I thought about it, I was like, wait, that's all I ever do. That's all any of us do. Mm-hmm. We're constantly working on stuff.
Yeah. I totally identify with that. And I would imagine you don't get to be as good as Eddie was without that kind of mono focus. And then when you have, if you're lucky like he was to be successful, well, then you're encouraged to just focus more. I mean, it was all good. There's probably a lot of music that we weren't even, privy to, works in progress and just thoughts and ideas. There's not a lot of time to listen to other people's stuff. And that also might be a choice. I know I've worked with artists who choose in the creating process in the studio to just stop listening to other stuff because they don't want to get interrupted. They don't want to like break their flow. And that's understandable.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Just the concept of not wanting to be influenced. I feel like it's an either or, because I find at times I get very influenced in a good way. I get excited to go make a particular style of, try out a particular groove or a style of song and go write something like that based on something I listen to. And inevitably, it never sounds anything like the thing that inspired me. So I feel like I'm pretty safe there.
I find the same. I'm constantly using references, musical references, and I'll, kind of get reinvigorated about a particular mic technique or a sound. Like, wow, that Curtis Mayfield sound on There's No Place Like America Today, like just the dry kick drum and snare sound. I'm going to try to find a project or a song or a section of a song with whatever band I might be working with, or just hope that it comes along that I can kind of emulate that sound. But in the end, it never really thoroughly sounds like that, which I find, which is why I find it surprising when people get, sued for ripping off other artists completely. I find that like, you didn't, we all are absorbing sound and music and influences. It's just whether or not you're like chewing your food and digesting it. I mean, are you really just going to rip off, Marvin Gaye and put it out and say, no, that's our own thing. It's pretty crazy. Right. I'm surprised when people, because with me and almost anybody I've worked with, it seems like the influences are, never that strong. And we'll worry about, is this too much like, this song X? And it ends up not being that way at all. Nobody outside of our group even knows what the influences were, can't hear them. So it always surprises me when people get dinged for just wholesale ripping off of chord progressions and sounds and melodies. It's like, wow, you didn't really put any effort in this at all, did you? That's my take on it.
Or maybe you put a lot in to be able to copy it so directly,
There's that too. Sure. Yeah, that's actually really hard to do, to actually like do a sound alike. That can be really challenging depending on what the source is.
I think that's also actually a great exercise in production and stuff like that, and certainly in mixing. As part of our learning process, trying to like figure out in the same way that if you're studying art, you go to the art museum and bring your easel and set up and try and copy the masters to just learn some of the ways to do it, I suppose.
That's how I did it. That's how I learned how to record. I didn't take any classes. I just tried to reverse engineer, the sound of a kick drum that I liked, the sound of a snare drum that I liked, and on, and would literally, drop the needle on the turntable in the control room at Idful and listen to, a kick drum. And then usually it was Brian Deck. It was back when we first built the place, and he would be out there on his kit, and I would try to EQ the kick drum or move the microphone until it sounded the way I liked it. And sometimes the source material would be things that were wildly out of our sonic wheelhouse, like not the kind of music that my career is known for. It would be, Manu Katché playing drums on a Robbie Robertson solo album. Like, I just really like the sound of the kick drum, just focus on the kick, and that's how we taught ourselves,
It's funny. Yeah. I mean, so much of what I learned about recording just comes from the experience of working with an artist in the studio and having a chance to, try and go for something over and over again. But it's an interesting reminder, the idea of one of the benefits about partnering up in a studio is if the other person can play drums, now you've got a chance to practice recording the drums and maybe even switch out, because I know you play drums too. And get a chance to have somebody.
I don't play. Sorry to interrupt you. I just gotta say, I don't play drums like Brian Deck can play drums.
Okay, fair.
Brian Deck's a proper trained, college educated percussionist and drummer. But having him as, our partner at Idful was fantastic, because he also had more experience recording at that point. So he had a comfort level with microphones and placement and just how to run a control room and a tape machine that I didn't have. I had some experience, but not the experience he had. Plus, he could really play. So I was spoiled rotten by, opening my first studio, partnered with Brian, and also being in Chicago, which is literally the home of all the best drummers at one point. Just like you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a world-class drummer for a while there.
Do you think that it's I'm trying to think about like the process of recording a great drummer. I know it can be a different experience when you put up the mics and a great drummer plays and you're like, man, those drums sound great, versus when you put up the mics and a less than great drummer plays and you think, uh-oh, I must not be very good at putting up mics. Do you think there's a lot to be learned from recording a great drummer? Does that help inform you on, what you need to do with another drummer? Do you think it sort of gave you a false impression that the drums are easy or anything like that?
That's a good question, because the very first thing I recorded was the band Tar, and it was their first single, and it was the song Antlers, and we hadn't even finished putting the drywall on the ceiling in the live room, and we were just doing tests. And so I offered to record the band for free, and that song got it released. It got them signed, helped get them signed to Amphetamine Reptile, which was
and what year was
their
this?
Label. Must have been 88.
Okay,
maybe December 88. And Mike Greenlees is a phenomenal drummer. Really, really precise, metronomic, just, a great technique, great player, doesn't miss the snare drum. Every snare drum is more or less the same hit. He's great. Just a great drummer. He hits his toms consistently. His cymbal work is great. He's just one of the best. And that was my inaugural run. So yeah, spoiled rotten. I still managed to gate the kick drum in a way that I would never, ever do, and haven't probably since then. And you can hear it. You can hear how it opens. It's a little boingy. Well, first of all, I would never gate a kick drum again. Although maybe technically I was not gating. I was expanding it, but it was more or less gating. And I think it was an Allison gain brain, or I forget what it was we were using.
Oh, the Keypex gate, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't recall what we had at the time. Or maybe an Orban. Maybe Orban made a rack mount gate. Whatever it wasn't very good, and I don't know why I used it. I probably didn't need it, but it was just, I did. And I still listen to that now and go, that's the only thing about that recording that I don't like. But it wasn't Mike's fault. It was my own.
Do you think you recorded it through the gate at that time?
No, I knew enough not to do that. Yeah, it's always a mixed decision. Yeah. Anyway, to answer your question, the next thing I recorded a few weeks later, maybe a month later, was the band Shrimp Boat, who had a drummer who was not of the caliber of Mike. And actually, caliber is not really the word. He's an incredibly musical and beautiful drummer, really creative musician who went on to be the bass player for Shrimp Boat and then for Sea and Cake, and is a phenomenal bass player. But also Eric Claridge. He's just a great musician overall. But he was cast in the role of drummer for this album, and he hit more inconsistently. He didn't have the same kind of approach to drumming, and that was not that hard to do.
Right. So that was one of your first experiences of seeing the difference between one drummer and another, and what you would do as an engineer.
Yes. So I will say this, based on my experience: if you've got a drummer who doesn't have the power to hit hard, and your drummer is playing in a band with big, loud guitars and it's very aggressive music, that's maybe the worst case scenario for an engineer. If you've got a drummer who can, hit hard and power through with the arm strength, upper body strength, and stamina, with these faster tempos or big, heavy, bands, that's going to be your best case scenario as an engineer. Sometimes that's not what you're presented with. And then in the era of Pro Tools and sound replacing, that takes some of it out of the equation, but I tend to lean heavily on room mics. So if you've got a drummer who isn't hitting the snare very hard, but the music kind of calls for a rim shot and a heavy hit, then sometimes you have to actually add ambiances to bolster that. I tend not to want to use sound replacement at all, ever, on my own productions, because I try to take care to get the sound right, I like to think.
Yeah. That's a whole nother thing, trying to find the balance of those. I remember the first time, initially discovering that it was a little easier to replace kick drums for some reason than snare drums. Maybe snare drums were so exposed that they just revealed themselves as robots too immediately.
100%.
And also, we probably weren't advanced in our snare drum replacement. We probably, just had one sample that just went like a machine gun in the fills.
Yeah, I find that sample replacement for kick drum has always been easier, but I think that has to do with the nature of the instrument, the isolation usually around it. There's usually not a lot of bleed, off-axis bleed, that's going to interrupt. And also how most drummers in most rock bands play kick drum. They hit it hard. Maybe there's some accents, and most sound replacement, plugins these days will allow for that. So yeah, you can have a single hit sample that'll sound just fine on a kick drum. Kick drum's the first thing to go down easy. Snare drum can be a bear, and in general,
Yeah.
I try not to use it. But at this point, I've got literally thousands of snare drums that I've got single hits of over the years now. I've been collecting them since like 1998, and in my own productions. And I oftentimes will prefer those sounds. And I think that if I'm getting hired by a band to mix a record that somebody else recorded, if they're hiring me, my guess is that they probably want it to sound like something I might have produced. So I will sometimes put my own snare drums in there.
What is what's a clever way to save a snare drum? So, many of us are probably doing what feels like a lot of recordings of one form or another. What do you want to share as far as the process of like, how would you grab that? Is it, do you solo the drums and bounce them out, or just select the snare hit and then bounce it out at some point? Or is there some part of the process that makes it easier for you to do that without having to turn that idea into kind of a headache for ourselves?
Since about 2001, I'm going to guess, when I was running my own Pro Tools rig completely and no longer working with an engineer, I've asked every drummer at the end of every session, meaning that we'll track a song and we'll do a couple takes of it, maybe get, okay, we've clearly got this song done, like finished. Let's move on to the next tune. I will then have the drummer go out and do what, past where the song ends. Maybe, if it's a 4-minute song, I'll go to 5 minutes in Pro Tools and put down a marker and name that hits. And then I'll ask the drummer to turn off the snare drum, give me the kick drum, record maybe, 3 or 4 kick drums, turn on the snares, hit the snares, hard, soft, loud, can hit it a little bit harder, turn off the snares, hit the rack tom, hit the other rack tom, hit the floor toms, and give long ring out times for those toms. Then starting with the hi-hat, give me closed and open hi-hats, give me crash cymbal on the left, give me crash cymbal on the right. Let's hear some ride pings, and then we move on to the next song. And I've got, at this point, probably thousands of those.
Yeah. And those, so, I'll just add to that to say that those, I feel like the first time I learned that concept was that those could be very helpful on even on the song you were just working on, because there could be a part where something was missing and you need a little Band-Aid piece that can come in and help fix up, the drums where something actually was whiffed or something like that.
100%. Yeah. I do that all the time. And I'll also, during mixdown, if I'll duplicate the snare drum track, and maybe I'll put, slate trigger 2 on there, and then use a sample of the actual drum, parallel compressed, and just feeding it under, because it's a pristine, version of the same, snare sound tuning from that song, from that session. And that works really well, especially if we get to a chorus where there's an open hi-hat and maybe the drummer went a little bit hard on that hi-hat and it's getting into too many things. Do that all the time. But mostly what I do is during the prep for mix later on, especially if it's an album, one of the things I do is just start to organize. And that's when I'll do, I'll tab to transient on the kick drum, let it play until the kick drum the ring out has ended. Then I will then, separate that, Command E, do a quick little crossfade, just fade out on the kick drum sound, and the same on the snare, same on the toms. And then that all goes into a file, a folder that'll build for the name of that band and that album, if I'm doing more than one album for that band over the years. So Touche Amore snare drums from 2013 or 2016, I have my choice of. And so I have so many kicks and snares. I mean, it just goes on and not as many toms, because I rarely replace toms, but they're there. And I don't do the same with crash cymbals, but I will do things like, if the drummer or the band's deciding, what we wanted in the middle of this quiet section is a kick and crash cymbal, bash, and didn't think to play it, I'll just construct it out of the kick drum crash and room ambiances, and it's there. That doesn't happen as often, but I don't know. If you can do that, and storage space is so cheap these days, nobody thinks anything about it, then you ought to do it.
Look, if you're like me, then you love having cool instruments in your studio, right? No matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio all the instruments and sounds you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then adding awesome overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Use the code ROCK10 now to get 10% off. Or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples, all over at nativeinstruments.com. Yeah, you could easily have a drive dedicated to just collecting drums too.
And that's what I have.
When you said you do this, you tab to the kick and then fade out the tail of it. Would you find it more useful to just have just the, if it's the inside kick mic or something like that, it's just that one sample from that one track that you keep, or do you find it's more useful to bounce out a mix of the drums with the kick drum and then that's the sample, that's sort of stereo?
I would use just the direct mic. So the mic, so the sound that I am using is to replace the sound that's already there. So I wouldn't do a blend. I mean, I have in the past, but not often. If I will do ambiances though. So my tracking room isn't particularly unique or amazing sounding, but if I'm working in a room that's really cool, if I get a chance to track in another studio, I'm going to be grabbing ambiances. So kick drums and snare drums, I'll just do the stereo rooms. If it's me tracking, I almost always have stereo rooms in a mono room, and I'll do those snare ambiances, and oftentimes that is the secret sauce in a mix of mine, is that triggered ambiances instead of an actual snare drum.
Yeah, because that might be. That can give a consistency to the sound of the drum. It can give it that sort of snare bigger than life quality that doesn't always go from the real snare mic into the reverb with enough consistency. And then also the dry snare, back to your original idea of having this, rescue snare for the chorus where there's a screaming open hi-hat that's coming through the live snare mic. In that case, the dry snare track itself can be converted into a sample and then put on the trigger track. So it's like it's like the track that has the top of the snare, maybe it's a 57 on it or something like that, and the hi-hat screaming through. Now we've got this clean recording of the very same snare drum on a second track that we can turn up louder and turn down the hi-hat version down a little if we needed to.
For me, the concept is always, if you can, you should try to maintain the sonic fingerprint of where the band was, who are the members of the band, in whatever studio you're in, and maintain that consistency so that it sounds like what it should be, which is a capture of a band in the moment, November of 2023. Instead of a mishmash of Terry Date and Chris Lord Alge, drum samples, which are perfectly fine. But how about your own? Let's get your own. And again, one of the things that might be a problem is that, maybe you're an engineer that hasn't quite figured out or doesn't have access to the microphones or preamps, the technology to capture a snare drum that's, being abused at full tilt with a hi-hat that's just bashing away. Or maybe the mic just shifted during the middle of the perfect take and all you're getting is hi-hat or crash cymbal or, sometimes accidents happen. But if you've done that sampling session where you've asked the drummer to hit each each instrument individually, then you've got a chance to correct for that. So this is just a CYA moment for me that's turned into a more philosophical thing. So like the sound of the Touche Amore 2013 album is the drums recorded in my recording space.
Yeah.
When they hired me 3 years later, they wanted to make a record with me again, but the desire was, hey, let's try. We'd like to hear the drums in a bigger space. So we rented a room in Burbank, just down the road, for 3 days of tracking drums. And so that record, Stage 4, has a totally different drum sound. But the difference in the drum sounds is less to do with his drums. I think he probably played the same drums, same snare drums, probably had some new cymbals just because cymbals break. But it had to do more with the mic selection and the room it was recorded in, and the fact that I record, a lot of room mics. So I wouldn't sample replace or sound replace any of those drums. I wouldn't mix and match. Like part of what makes Stage 4 sound the way it is because I do use a lot of ambience on drums. There's not a whole lot else that's different. I mean, we brought the hard drive back here to my place. We tracked bass, guitar, and vocals. So everything was the same here when it came to those instruments. But the only real sonic difference was the old, 80 series Neve we played through, and drums, and the tracking room. So maintaining that is really important to me. But it's made easier to do if you have pristine, ambience recorded on your individual hits. You can really lean into that and not worry about overhead or cymbal bleed.
Yeah. Have you noticed that even close mics sound distinct from each other, even on a same drum kit in different spaces in different studios?
Sure. I guess if the room's interacting in a way, in a way that might be either unpleasant or unexpected, sure. But if you're close micing really close, then not so much. I'm always surprised at how little bleed there might be if I'm tracking a band in my small space, and I'll sometimes have like bass guitar and guitars going. The room mics will always pick up everything. So there's almost, too much bass, too much guitar. But if the guitars are loud guitars, there's almost no drums in those mics that are facing the cones on the cabinet.
Yeah.
And vice versa. The close mics on the drums seem to pick up almost nothing except maybe bass, if the bass is really loud.
Okay, cool. Well, I love that we just leapt right into all about drums. Let me ask you another thing. So one of the things I really do notice on your records, and you've done, well, let me preface with this. You've got some great videos on YouTube. So Rockstars, if you want to check that stuff out, Brad does talk about doing drum stuff. You had some videos talking about samples. I think you've done some stuff over at Pro Mix Academy too with Warren Hewart. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we did a couple of those. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So do you want to give a shout out to any of your drum teaching courses that are out there now? If the Rockstars would like to just go follow up with more of that stuff.
I think the only ones I've done are for Produce Like a Pro, for Warren Hewart.
Okay, great.
Thing. Yeah, I think that's it. I would suggest you just go to YouTube, go to Warren's page, or just Google search Brad Wood Warren. I think I've done some interviews with him, and then I did, I think, a single mix thing and maybe a drum thing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
But it's a while ago, and I've kind of forgotten. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I just like to give a shout out to
sure.
Remind Rockstars where they can go find more good stuff. Now, one of the things I was going to say I noticed about your records is kick drums really sound awesome. There's like even though you started with a bad gating story, you obviously figured it out, and there's a quality that is like the right balance between punch in a rock or an indie rock setting, and also pillow and air. And I find that that's surprisingly challenging to get sometimes on records. It can be. I can find myself sticking a dynamic mic inside a kick, and then you get to the mix and it's like, it just sounds so it sounds so beatery. It doesn't seem to have the quality of air on it. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you pay attention to when arriving at a kick drum that makes you happy and puts a smile on your face?
For me, it's all about the actual drum sound, how it sounds in the room. And I always do the baffling myself, meaning the material that goes inside the kick drum. I have recorded some kick drums with a sealed front head. And I understand the desire to want to have that. If you're a drummer, you like the way that feels and you like the back pressure that comes off of having a solid front head. And I also understand the desire to sound like John Bonham from Led Zeppelin. Everybody wants that cool sound. And I also understand the desire to have that classic Steve Albini sound, which is like a derivation of the love of Bonham and Jimmy Page's production. God, it's just so good, right? But
and to qualify, just to add to that, Rockstars, by solid front head, we mean you're looking at the front head of the drum. There's no hole in it.
That's right.
Which is how they start, actually.
Yeah, that's right. They start out with no hole, and then holes are cut. So learning my craft in Chicago, lots and lots of drummers at that time, especially the early 90s, wanted to have sealed front head. And sometimes even with nothing inside, no baffling, which tends to make a really basketball-y kind of sound. Boing, 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 right?
You think that was a response to, like a lot of times record making is a response to the last batch of records that was made, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, constantly, especially back then when the internet didn't make things instantaneous, where it might, there might be a wave of reaction that might take a while. I think the wave might be like taller, or the response might be deeper. And when Dave Grohl joined Nirvana, and then within a year put out Nevermind, it literally changed pretty quickly how drummers played that I was recording. I mean, it was a pretty solid reaction in a good way. It was great. It was great to have a really great drummer be the thing that was going to influence drummers for a while. But solid front heads have always not confused me, but they're quite challenging. And I'm not a huge fan of putting a mic on the batter side, where the drum batter strikes the head. I've just not been a fan of it. It's not, unless I'm actually playing the drums where I'm sitting at the kit, that's rarely the sound that I hear. So if I'm at the kit and I'm hitting the drums, well then, yeah, sure. Put a mic where I'm hearing it. But I tend to almost always refer to my mic choices back to the audience. And the audience isn't hearing the kick drum that way. The audience is hearing the kick drum addressing it from the front. And so I try to maintain, and I just feel more comfortable with miking from the audience perspective. And that is not reversed and around, the front head of the kick drum. So it's a long answer. I tend to like to put a hole in the front head. I will record a solid. I'll record.
Don't put a hole in the beater head, Rockstars.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but
your beater just goes right through the hole.
I mean, I've tried it. It doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. But also where you place the hole, I used to be really specific about that. I only would allow it to be centered on the drum, and I've let go of that preference. It's less important. But for me, it's all about where you place the microphone, and I'm very specific in how that kick drum is baffled or not baffled, and it's a bit of a secret sauce, and it really depends on the drummer and the kick drum. But in general, I tend to not baffle much of the batter head. I baffle a little bit of the front head, and I put a brick inside there to hold it down, because I don't like to use any kind of fancy material. It's almost always a pillow or a blanket or a piece of foam that I've had. I've got a couple different sizes
Does it have to be a family heirloom pillow, or can it just be any kind of pillow?
Preferably, yeah. But I don't like to load. I don't use a lot of baffling. I like to use the bare minimum, but that bare minimum is usually fully touching the front, the front head, and maybe touching a little bit of the batter head, and maybe it's a couple pieces of foam, and then they're held in place by a brick I've got. And I started doing this back in the 1980s. We had some.
So this is a 1980s brick.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it's actually probably
a vintage brick,
a 2000 era brick. I mean, the brick itself might sound better if it was from, the classic era of bricks, which would be what, in 1930s?
Probably.
But
yeah.
So starting in the 80s, we had these bricks, and the bricks, when you put them inside the drum, oftentimes would have a sharp edge. It would kind of cut the hole that you've in the drummer's thing, and that would be kind of a drag. So I whimsically glued velvet, cloth over the brick, and at one point we had like
brick.
we had velvet covered bricks. We had 4 or 5 of them at Idful, and those started getting stolen on a regular basis because, like, what's funnier than having a velvet covered brick to hold your door open at your apartment after you've recorded your album with Brian and Brad? So let's just steal the brick. I got into the velvet covered brick business practically, and I've continued it here. Every studio I've ever run or owned has velvet covered bricks because it allows you. Plus, the brick doesn't if sometimes that brick might move and shift, or I can lay the brick on the wood of the shell and it doesn't make a scraping sound. And sometimes if a drummer's really mashing the kick drum, that it actually might make a sound like the sound of a brick against wood is not really part of what you want to record. So velvet wrapped bricks are very important, but it's not for baffling, but to hold the baffling down that you've got in there.
So where do the rock stars get one of these velvet covered bricks from Brad Wood?
Well, you can book a session, and then you can steal the one that I have, which would make me mad because I'd know you'd done it, and then I'll be mad at you. So for encouraging people to steal my stuff. And sometimes what happens, most of the time I imagine, is that at the end of the session, the drummer packs up his or her stuff and takes it away and then realizes, oh, God, there's a brick inside. No wonder this thing was so heavy when I moved. I don't think anybody's taken it intentionally. But
let's
anyway.
Let's talk about the baffling. Like what kind of baffling do we reach for to start tamping down the inside of this kick drum with the brick?
I mostly use different kinds of foam. So I have, I've been lucky in Valley Village here where I live, that just down the road, there's a foam factory where you can buy all kinds of foam in various, thicknesses and widths and sizes. They'll custom cut. And they also have a lot of discard bags. You can buy a great big, 30-gallon hefty bag of foam pieces for maybe it's $5 these days. Maybe they've gone up,
Wow. Goodie bag of foam.
And it's various densities and sizes. And
this is why you built a studio right in that location.
That's right. Yeah. Access to
scouted out the location to be near the foam factory.
And right around the corner, or right, a block away from the foam factory is at least 2 flight case companies. So I think that there is a symbiotic relationship there.
Right.
So that's what I use. I mostly use foam that's been cut to various widths and lengths, so that it can fit inside of a 20-inch kick or an 18 or a 21 or 22, and a couple pieces can go together, but they're usually 1-inch or 1.5-inch foam. And
as far as the depth, yeah,
the thickness of it. So it might be like an 18 by 20-inch piece of foam. I might have a half a dozen of those that I can grab and stack them up. I do sometimes put a pillow in there if it's a really old kick drum, like an old Slingerland kick, and what we're looking for is a real old-timey kind of thing. Then a pillow goes in because a soft pillow with a brick on it is going to sound, to hold it down, is going to sound like what they might have used in a jazz session from the 50s or 60s. But in general, I'm not recording a lot of those kinds of kick drums. If it's a modern kick drum, that's what I'll use. I very rarely will use any of the dampening products that are out there for kick drum that you can buy. I don't even know what they call them anymore. I tried them for a while and I got tired of that. I like an unadulterated kick drum head that's like fastened right to the shell, and then I'll do the dampening.
Yeah. Well, when I was lucky to have Jody Stevens on the podcast a while ago, I asked him about the kick drum, and he said he has the same little pillow that's like, almost threadbare that's been in his kick drum since the 1970s. So I think there's something to be said for antique pillows and velvet bricks. Had he only known about the velvet brick?
Well, the velvet brick is really just to hold things down and not damage your precious drum or to scrape and make sound.
Yeah. So Rockstars, if you're not familiar with Jody, he played in the band Big Star, which is one of my favorites. All right, cool. So shall we, anything more we want to say about drums? I mean, I guess just the last comment about drums that comes to mind for me too is just how important consistency is in hits and how that translates to being easier to mix drums. And I think sometimes it can be helpful to learn and practice with programmed drums because they have that quality. And then you go to a real drum kit and you realize, that's why the snare is loud and then quiet and things like that.
Well, sure. And again, it's really program dependent. So it depends on the kind of music you're recording. And if you're recording stuff that requires really consistent drumming, then really consistent miking helps too. So if you're putting a mic that's getting a lot of other information in it other than the one sound that you've hoped to capture, then you've got a problem. And I was going to say, to finish my miking technique, for many, many years now, I only use a single mic on a kick drum, and it's almost always an Audio-Technica ATM 25. And I've experimented a little bit lately with some of the SE mics, which are pretty good. They're pretty good, but I still really like the ATM 25, and they're getting hard to find. I think they still make them new, but they don't sound the same. So I like early version from the 1980s. I've got a couple of those.
It's a dynamic mic.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, dynamic.
What about
mic
placement? What are some good places for us?
Well, that's the thing. That's where the most variance is. So I dampen the kick drum, get it to sound the way I think it should sound, and with agreement, hopefully, from the drummer, and we're all on the same page. Feels good to the drummer, sounds good to everyone. Then I will put the mic, usually not all the way inside the drum shell, but usually the ATM 25 is kind of halfway inside and outside the front head. Like it's sort of situated in that hole. And I almost always pointed directly at the batter. So, where that thing hits the drum head is where I'm pointing. And so it's usually at an angle. I almost never mic a kick drum straight on. It's almost always angled somehow, which is why I just get a lot of success with that. And I will move that microphone when I'm getting drum sounds at the start of the recording session. I'll move that microphone a quarter of an inch, one direction or the other. I might do it a half a dozen times to get it right. Sometimes I'll add a second mic, a 47 FET style microphone, usually like a large large diaphragm, an LDC, a large diaphragm condenser mic that's miking just the front head. But I haven't done that.
Would that be parallel or very near the same distance as the other mics, so right up on the head, or is it?
No, it's usually a little bit further back, but not by much. I almost never do that anymore though, because I just end up not using that mic. I've just evolved into a single mic on the kick drum kind of person. I'm happy with it. It's been that way for 20 years.
Leaning that way too. And I found that the more I got comfortable with understanding what was going on with the low end with my mix, the more I realized that large diaphragm mic out in front of the kick drum was sort of messing with the low end of the dynamic mic. I guess it's the distance between the two that really changes it, and probably the quality of what the mic sounds like too.
I see all the time pictures of people using, an LDC on the front head, and sometimes one of those sub mics, whatever, and I briefly played with those back when that was a thing. I had back when we all had NS10s, I had a spare woofer, and I, converted it into a microphone. And what I found is that it just offered me an awful lot of super low end that when I was mixing, I was filtering out almost completely, and then phase issues. And I'm not saying that that's not a legit way to mic a drum. I'm just saying that with the toolkit that I've assembled of my own skills, it's never been useful. Not once. I've tried them. I'm not going to anymore. Like, I'm way too mercenary these days. If you want to come in and record drums with me, I'm going to do it the way I do it. And the way I do it is going to probably make everybody happy. Like, I don't know that there's any, I hope there's no clients of mine who have gone like, Brad Wood got us the worst drum sound we've ever gotten. That's probably not happening. I hope,
Atom Audio's S-Series, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors featuring 5 models, from the compact S2V all the way up to the powerful S5H. The range builds on Atom Audio's iconic heritage with new technology for improved acoustic performance. With new woofers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine, the S-Series ensures accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail, and a forward-looking digital connectivity. Backed by a 5-year guarantee, Atom Audio monitors embody durability and professional sound for your studio at atomaudio.com. It just brings to mind that there's a funny combination of what we do where, you're in pursuit of the simplest, most direct path to a great sound that's going to work for the record. And yet at the same time, all these, rosy garden paths that we have to explore in learning this stuff, they're all legit. Like, totally rock stars, you should try putting 4 mics on a kick drum and explore all these different sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And then totally, you will probably discover that you don't need 4 mics on the kick drum. But now you know what they sound like.
Sure. And it really is program dependent. So, depending on what kind of music you're recording, you might want to reach for any or all of those techniques. But these days, when I'm producing a record, I'm often doing something that's in a genre that includes really, really loud guitars and really loud drums. And I've evolved a technique to record those instruments in a way that gets me consistent results that people like. So, and liking that includes myself. Like, there's nothing more disappointing than recording an instrument or a band and discovering that you yourself have displeased yourself. You've made errors. And I just, at almost 60 years old, I'm really not in that business anymore. Life is disappointing enough. I'm not going to go out of my way to get out of pocket and disappoint myself. Doesn't mean that I don't learn new techniques. And I've learned some miking techniques for guitars. Or I should say, I've embraced some miking techniques for guitars that I had, maybe the last time you interviewed me, have very strong negative feelings about. And I have completely gone 180 degrees in the other direction. So we can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, definitely. So that we might be touching on that topic here, but another video that you had was talking about some of the ways that you might double or triple process a bass, and it's mixing stuff in the box and using. You were talking about using amp rig to reamp a bass in a studio setting, and I love that stuff because I have also discovered that many of these digital tools, certainly when we started making records, Brad, the digital tools were like a dream. It was like, what if there's artificial intelligence one day? It's this far off concept. But they didn't sound so great. And now they've really come such a long way that, amp simulators and things like that in Pro Tools can really be very effective as part of making records. And so I don't know if that's part of your thinking on this stuff, or, do you want to talk about any of those things?
I would 100% avail myself to every amp simulator that I can get my hands on. Not that I'll always use it, but I like to have it there. And to that end, I always record a DI of any guitar that I'm tracking and a DI for any bass guitar I'm tracking. And if I have an option to consult with a band I might be working with who aren't recording with me, but I'm going to be mixing, I'll ask them to please track an unadulterated DI of the bass and guitar, and I usually get that. That's great. It doesn't mean that I'm always using amp simulators, but I sure like to have the option. And oftentimes it's not to replace anything they've done with real microphones. It's auxiliary. It's, added bonus, added benefit. I will say this: bass amp simulators are so good now that that if I'm mixing someone else's record and I got a good DI, and I'll put it through some SVT, plug-in. I think Softtube probably makes the one I like the best right now. I think UAD makes one as well that's really good.
Yeah, I use one from Plug-in Alliance that's pretty excellent too.
That's what I'm talking. Yeah, Plug-in Alliance.
Yeah.
Sorry, not
Yeah.
Softtube. Well, Softtube has good ones too, but Plug-in Alliance is the one that I'm most liking now. I'll end up just turning off the amp and the actual mic'd amp. I'll do a little bit of a shootout. It's pretty incredible. I think that's dialed in, and maybe that has to do with maybe there might be something a little less complex sonically about a single note for the most part being struck as opposed to maybe 6 notes on a guitar. So there's a sonic simplicity for single note bass. So it might be easier to emulate. I don't know, but boy, that stuff is good. Having said that, I'm always going to try to use the recorded amp sounds, but in my own production. So, if you're skating poly, you hired me to make a record, every guitar goes down with a DI. And
do you want to describe that just in case they're trying to picture how do I do a DI when I'm doing a guitar? Because some people might be thinking, I plug my guitar straight into the amp. What are you talking about?
Well, you don't. You don't plug it straight into the amp. You plug it straight into a DI box. Or you can plug it into your tuner. If you've got a pedal tuner that has a separate out, usually they have an active out and then sort of a bypass out or whatever. You can take the second output and plug that into your DAW, and that might be your DI.
That as I picture that might be before your effects pedals. If people put their tuner at the beginning of the chain.
Yes, I usually like to record a DI, meaning the direct input, which would be what's coming off of the guitar without any effects, without any pedals. So, your bass or your guitar might go through a whole bunch of pedals that you like. I don't want that. I want just the sound of the output of the guitar. Because we may not like all the reverb pedals and delay pedals and distortion that we put on the affected track. And if your DI is post pedal board, then you're going to be committed to that sound no matter what. So I usually ask for it or insist on it to be the driest output, so you want to break that out. So typically how I get a DI on guitar is dependent on the amplifier, the guitars, and the pedals. If you're working in my studio, I've got a really nice setup that I still find myself varying. So I have maybe 5 or 6 different brands of DIs, and some DIs work better than others. And they'll, the ones that have a ground lift on it are really essential. But that also means that sometimes, like, I'll take the DI might be I'll tap off the XLR out. And that'll go, I have a bunch of cables that are XLR to TT, tiny telephone, because I have a TT patch bay. And that might go into my preferred UA 2108 or whatever it is that's wired into my patch bay. That might cause all kinds of ground problems, or ohms mismatches. And there's switches for that. I can, push, and sometimes nothing will work. Then I got to go into the amp room where the guitar amp is and maybe put a ground lift on that cable, take the 3-prong out, plug in the ground lift, adapter, plug it back in again. No more, now you have joy, no more buzz. But getting a DI that isn't buzzy or doesn't cause everything in your chain to hum with mismatch, unbuffered, all these stuff that I don't even really know what it is. But just be prepared. was what I have to say is keep a bunch of different DIs around if you have that option and you're fortunate to have because one might work for one session and it might not work the next one, and it depends on the guitar. You have an old guitar that doesn't have humbuckers, or does it have humbuckers, or is it active electronics on the bass? I mean, there's a million different things that can cause you grief. And so and then I document everything, so if that guitar player comes back in again, hopefully we won't have to go through this whack-a-mole guessing game to finally get a nice quiet sound. Because once you're taking your guitar and your pedals and your guitar amp and you're interfacing with your pro audio equipment, your outboard stuff, that's where you get mismatches. That's where you get ground hum
loops and stuff,
and that's really problematic. You might have the best rig in the world, but as soon as you plug it up and you tether it to your actual recording gear, everything goes out the window. That's happened to me with every session.
Yeah, exactly. And the other part of that is if rockstars, if you're thinking in your head, oh, so I have to be like really thoughtful about hooking this stuff up. I think sometimes people have this idea like I've had a band come in and they're like, it doesn't buzz at home, and it's like it's buzzing in the studio or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, the truth is, like, much like starting your computer on a Thursday and everything works fine, and then you come back into the studio and you start it up on Friday and Pro Tools isn't working today for some reason. It's the same thing with the guitar stuff in the studio. It's like, it's not that there's one right answer and you're trying to avoid the wrong one. It's just, you just want to be, Boy Scouts make great recording engineers. Be prepared with as many DIs and options as you can.
If you want, let me describe to you, for instance, the lengths that I had to go to get a proper DI for Greg Anderson, who's one of the guitarists from the band Sun O. Actually, it's pronounced Sun, but it's spelled Sun O, like the amplifier company. And Greg is, Sun is known for extreme volume, multiple guitar amps, and I've been working on a variety of his solo projects. He records under the name The Lord because he runs Southern Lord Records, Sun's label. And we've done a lot of recording over the last 3 years. And every time I set up, I have, taken photographs that I've printed. I go into my folders going back to 2020, and I'll pull all that stuff out from every session. And every session is a different setup because he brings a different array of amps and a different array of pedals because he's got literally, apparently, every great distortion pedal that's ever been created, multiple versions of it. So he'll have like 10 Big Muff Pies, this is the original one from 1967, and here's one from 1970, and here's a Soviet one from whatever, and he's got like 30 Rat pedals, and who knows what he's going to pull out to work with, but they're all old, it seems. And also he's got a bunch of Earthquaker stuff because Sun, the band, has done a collaboration for the Sun Life pedal, so he's got probably, 100 Life pedals, I guess. I mean, you just got a wall of them, and he pulls out, there's like 4 variants of that. And they all have different ohms things, and there's buffering and not buffering, and it's all problematic when it comes to me getting a pristine, non-ground looped, hummy, buzzy sound. So, in order to get this recorded this last week, I'm trying to capture that DI. He's out in the live room where he's got all of his amplifiers set up and making, aircraft landing and takeoff level sound, 120 dB all day long. He doesn't want to track everything out there. He wants to be able to hear it in the studio coming through the speakers. So we get the sound that he wants. I've got the DI coming, through the patch bay with all the mic, that I've mic'd up, and they're all coming into the control room. Greg comes back in here, and then he just wants to plug his guitar in and play it through there. Through the studio out, in the live room. all kinds of mayhem and growling and buzzing because, again, I'm interfacing with my recording equipment. So the only way to get around it, I've got what's the name of it? Let's see.
And that mayhem and the buzz really gets, exploded when you're doing distortion guitars and super gained up stuff. Like the smallest thing just gets exaggerated.
Yeah, it's exponentially louder. The gain staging is insane. So he's playing a Les Paul that goes through like an Earthquaker life pedal that goes into a 1960s era Big Muff Pi that then goes into a Laney amp from like 1970, like the Black Sabbath, amp that's turned up like really loud through a Sun through a Sun 412 cabinet. It's also branching out of his distribution box into a Fender Bassman from the 1960s, a 68 Fender Bassman that's turned up to an ungodly level. And then it's also going through that distribution. And each amp has its own array of distortion pedals. So like it's being distorted before it goes to each array of amplifiers distortion pedals, and they're all unique, and he dials them all in. And then there's another a Sun Model T that's going through another 412 cabinet. And so the gain staging is insane. I mean, it's just it's distorted, piles and piles of distortion, and there's often an octave component folded in with the Earthquaker life pedal. So you're getting octave below, and sometimes even an octave below the below, like 2 octaves below that. So I had to use a radial J48, which is an active direct box. It needs 48 volts in order to operate. But that one gives that DI box gives me the most options. I know there's like Little Labs is probably what I really need, is to have like multiple options. But I don't have those.
The PCB.
So, yeah, maybe somebody ought to, get me one of those for Christmas. It would be great. So I use the J48 out in the live room to derive his, the DI that I'm going to use. And then that comes into my patch bay here and out into, what was I using for that? I think I was using my UA 2108, one side of that, with the ground lifted on all of the amplifiers, and it's going into the very flex, the amp. The Laney needs to run at 107 volts as opposed to 110. Wow. Because it just.
So you're using what do you call it?
The Variac. The Variac. Yeah. So, but the Variac is running ungrounded. If you're an electrical engineer or an electrician, like just turn this off now. And also keep fire extinguishers at hand, because we did set one of his amps on fire back in 2020. So anyway, so in order to get that buzz to go away, I had to set up a dummy patched J48 DI box in here. So he's standing here with his guitar. I take the output of the guitar into the J48 box, a second one in here that is then dummy patched into a 9098 input. The output of that, I'm not using the output. That's why I call it dummy patch. But it needs the 48 volts, and I needed to be able to flip the phase on the non. I'm not even using it, but just the fact that it just worked. It was the only way to get it to quiet down, is to use 2 different DIs, one of which is not being used at all, except to provide consistent 48 volts out of the guitar and a phase flip. Wow. Even though it was dummy patched, the output of that DI was never used. It just had to go into something.
That's epic.
And so I got to write all that down. So yes, when I say, I can kind of cavalierly say, yeah, please always record a DI with your guitar or with your bass. It can be, I have to acknowledge, it can be quite a chore. I mean, I think I spend more time trying to get a quiet guitar DI than I do miking all of Greg's guitar amps.
That's hilarious. That's awesome.
And he loves it when he has to wait around to play for like an hour while I figure this crap out.
I am massively impressed with iZotope Ozone. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The Mastering Assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need for a professional result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want. Using simple yet sophisticated modules like Clarity, Impact, Low-End Focus, Stabilizer, Imager, Exciter, and Spectral Shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, you simply adjust the settings to your own taste, and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means you can reach into your mix at the mastering stage and manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval and get comments back like, holy bleep, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, you're a wizard, finally I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge, well then I know I'm doing something right. So check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great apps at iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music we are creating to the style that we want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments' Complete Bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and then adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's a great way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Brad Wood, joining us from Seagrass Sound Studio or Seagrass Studios.
That's right.
You do call it studios plural?
No, just the one. It's just one room. Yeah.
Do you do what I do? I always say, I say plural or mono? I just automatically say that.
Yeah, I know it's a mono studio, so it's a Seagrass studio, but you can throw an S on there. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care.
Awesome. Well, you ready to jam? Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right. So tell us about your studio. Now, I know you've made some big changes probably since the last time we chatted, I think, because you got into Atmos and you're doing great Atmos mixes. And Rockstars, a reminder, we should have a playlist in the show notes where you can click through. Of course, that one's on Apple. And if you have the right AirPod Pros or headphones, I guess if you just use regular headphones on another system, you can make your Apple Music play, can switch it to Atmos Always On, for example, on a desktop or a laptop and listen that way too. But anyway, enough about me. Tell us about your studio and your Atmos setup.
So in 2020, this is a good story, by the way. And the best part is it's all true. In 2020, quarantine began. And if you're in the United States, you're parked on your rear end going nowhere unless you're an essential worker, and there are plenty of people doing that. But if you're like me, you were sitting around doing nothing. And a couple days into the quarantine, my dear friend Emily Lazar, who's a mastering engineer and Atmos mixer and a goddess of the recording world, she sent me a text and said, well, while we're all sitting on our butts during quarantine, now's a great time to get smart about Atmos. And I read that and I texted back, Atmos, schmatmos. And then she called me like a minute later, yelling at me, saying, hey man, don't, like,
don't be a dick, man.
Don't sleep on this. And she gave me her reasons for why I should pay attention to this. And I promised that I would. And then a week later, again, she texted me, hey, so, did you read any of those articles I sent you links to? And I hadn't. And I was honest with her. I said, no, I've been kind of busy trying to keep my family not, from dying from this disease and stuff. And she's like, come on, you don't want to be one of those people that, that misses this opportunity. There's this stuff sounds great. And of course she worked on, at that point, like, the Beatles stuff with Giles Martin, and had done an awful lot of Atmos mixing and mastering. So she knows what she's talking about. And so I did read some articles, and I very slowly got a little more interested in it. But I wouldn't say I was a skeptic. I was a cynic, because I think cynicism in our industry for technological advances is not necessarily a bad trait.
It's the core of punk rock. Come on, let's be honest.
Well, there's a little bit of that, but that's assigning an attribute that I don't necessarily think, in my case, is being honest. I mean, if I want to glow myself up, I could say I'm just punk rock that way, and I'm not going to get fooled by the man. It had less to do with that and more with just being older and unimpressed with other attempts at immersive sound in the past, and just thinking that things like this were gimmicks. So that's not particularly punk rock. That's just age-based cynicism.
Were you still a little bit pissed off about how much you had spent on your Betamax player?
I'm still smarting from my Betamax system. Yes, and that is a vastly superior format, by the way, Beta.
I've heard that.
Yeah. So anyway, Emily put me in touch with Carrie Thomas, who at that time was with Dolby. And again, we're all limited we can't do anything, in person, but I got access to the plugin, the renderer, Dolby Atmos renderer plugin, and I played around with it. What Emily was getting at was that she had just finished mastering the new Liz Phair album that I had wrapped up. And or actually, I'm sorry, she had mastered a couple of songs from the upcoming album. It wasn't done yet, but we were wrapping that up. So she had already mastered a couple of the singles that had come out. And she's like, Liz is always this kind of, cinematic kind of sound with her latter records. And Liz is very much into the headphone experience. And she's always been asking me to make sounds and voices come from different locations. And that's always been a challenge going back to her debut album. So Emily was right in saying, like, hey, this is an ideal candidate for mixing in Atmos. I'm like, well, what's even the playback for Atmos? Who's going to, there's Tidal, there's Amazon Music, but those are all pretty limited and, as far as reach. So I still wasn't really convinced. And what it really took was Emily and Carrie talking to the people at Capitol. And even though we were in the middle of 2020's pandemic, they did a playback for me, very carefully with masks and distancing in one of their Atmos rooms in maybe September 2020. And I heard Rocket Man, which is Elton John's, beloved song, mixed by Greg Penny and another person from Dolby, who I can't remember now. But boy, is that a great way to learn about Atmos, to have it screaming through these beautiful speakers in this great room with an amazing song and a lyric and instruments that are recorded to evoke the lyric, and it's soaring with the rockets taking off at the chorus. It's ideal as a demonstration song. And before it was even over, I was literally jumping out of my chair, running to the various speakers to hear things. The light bulb went off so bright, and all of the words that Emily tried to get me to read, and all of her cajoling and asking me to, think smart and think ahead and not just be a grumpy old man about something. Not be a cynic. All of those words just melted away because all I needed to do is hear it. And I've learned that talking about Atmos is not nearly as effective as listening to Atmos. And
it's like dancing about architecture.
That's right. That's a great quote. It's very similar in that regard. But from that point on, I got out to the parking lot at Capitol, and I'm sitting in my car, calling Emily going, oh my God, yeah, wow, man, I get it. And then from that point on, it was just a matter of me figuring out if and how I could afford to build my own system. And it took me a while. That was September or October, I can't remember exactly, of 2020. And I didn't install my system until July of 2020. I took the whole month off. But I started gathering up the finances and the resources, and then eventually buying the equipment, finding out if my room could actually be suitable for an Atmos setup, and then, buying the gear and listening to people who were warning me about supply chain issues. There's been a chip fire in Japan. There's, the Wuhan, district has been closed down for months. There's going to be a crunch. We're already sort of sensing it. We've got pallets of equipment that are stuck on ships that can't come in because they're all backed up because of COVID. If you can get access to your Avid Matrix Studio and your speakers, from PMC, and your amplifiers from LEA, get them now. I bought them all months before I ever installed it. I was like paranoid, and I'm glad, because by the time I was actually installing it, you couldn't get any of that stuff. So it was real.
Yeah. Wow. So what did you end up doing for your system? I mean, I think you've got, I've can see one of the speakers hanging on the ceiling behind you, and I've seen some other pictures, and you sort of have, because sometimes the challenge with Atmos is these speakers, we're used to having what we want in front of us, but then to find room on the walls and the ceiling and behind us and stuff, it gets pretty tight quarters. And so there are some sort of shallower options for speakers, right?
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I went with PMC, the speaker manufacturer. They make what they call the wafer series. I don't even know if they're making those anymore, or they're not making this specific, what you can see here. They're not making these anymore. But whether they're calling the replacement shallow speaker a wafer, I'm not sure. I can't remember. But this is a discontinued model now, the Wafer 1 and the Wafer 2s. They're low profile, and they're designed to either be soffit mounted, which means inside the wall, like you build a box, that it would be flush into and maybe covered, or you can have them be surface mounted like mine are. And those all require amplifiers, so they're not self-powered. My system is a 9.1.4, and the 9 refers to, for those people who don't know, the speakers that are pointing at your face, that are like eye level, ear level, right? So there's 9 of them. There's a left in the front, and there's a center in the front, and a right. So there's 3 there. And then there's 9 more. There's wide left and right. There's side left and right. There's rear left and right. And that makes up the 9. Then the 1, the dot 1, is it refers to how many subwoofers you have. I have a single massive subwoofer. A lot of people have a 2, I'll have 2 subwoofers, a smaller, and my room might have benefited from that. But at the time, it was what was available to me and what made sense. So I have a single subwoofer. And then the last number of those 3 is 4, and that refers to your height speakers, your overhead speakers. And I have 4 of them. And I think you can go up to 6 with Dolby. You can have a 916 if you wanted. A lot of people do 714 or 712. And these are just smaller arrays of speakers. And again, the first number always refers to the number of speakers that are pointing at you from all directions.
Yeah.
That are at eye level or ear level. Yeah. I like it.
All right. So you got a 914 setup. Yeah, that does sound like a lot. And I think I've heard, and what's the 4 again? The dot 4 at the end?
The 4 is the overheads. So
that's the overheads. Okay.
Or we refer to them as heights, the height speakers. Yeah.
So 3 in the front, 4 on the sides, 2 in the back.
Yeah.
Is the 9.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at your sides, does the Atmos know if it's sending it to the side one on the that's sort of like forward side or back side, stuff like that? And same with the ceilings? Or does it just kind of send to the side and it hits both speakers on the side at once?
Well, you can move using objects, which is the Dolby term they use for the placement of audio. If you can use objects, or you can use the bed, which is more of a film and TV reference that is a legacy of surround, and it's something that's used all the time in the film and TV mix world. So the bed is the actual, as far as I know, the specific speakers. So if you place a sound into the bed for the wide left and right, it'll only be in those speakers. If you put it into if you choose to use objects, which is something that Dolby created for Atmos, you can move those sounds in between speakers. You can move the sound, up around you, behind you, directly behind you, and depending on, on the material, it can be quite effective, at placing it in spaces that are not specifically out of a speaker. There's a lot of math going on there.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some people get hung up. Like, wait a second, how can you accurately place a sound that's not, in the direct, sight line or ear line of a speaker? And,
well, that one's easy. If you set up your stereo speakers correctly and you close your eyes, you might notice, rock stars, that the vocal sounds like it's floating in the center of the two speakers.
Well, and there's the thing that's been happening now for a very, very long time, and you can technology is getting to the point where you can, access like hollow point, the hollow point. I think that's the name of it. That's the system that's being used at the Sphere, the MSG Sphere in Las Vegas.
Oh, interesting.
I got to see a demonstration or hear a demonstration of that earlier this year at their production Sphere, which is in Burbank near the airport, maybe 20 minutes from my house. And using math and an array, a giant array of speakers, high-powered speakers, you can place very specific sounds 300 feet away from you. You can be in the audience sitting in like row 16, seat 5, and somebody 2 seats away from you won't hear what you're hearing. It's insane.
Wow.
And they're using that at the MSG Sphere. And what people are telling me who've gone to the show is it's like the most beautiful sound in every seat, like every chunk, every section of seating in this giant theater of 17,000, audience members. They all have their own customized sound for that area. So, so that they're not all getting their own separate mix, but they're getting, the optimized mix of the band, in this case, U2.
For their seat.
For where they're sitting. Yeah.
Good Lord. So everybody else is sitting there quietly, and all of a sudden I'm like, Bing, Liz Shaw, your pizza is ready. Please go to the front
you
counter and pick it up now.
You could do that, and during this demonstration of this system, they were doing stuff like that. It was insane. It blew my mind, and it made me think again a little more thoughtfully about what Dolby's doing with Atmos. This is literally not rocket science. This is something that's existed since stereo. The idea of positioning speakers and combining speakers in order to combine to strengthen a signal, so that a listener at various distances will hear something that's pleasant or the desired effect. And if you're talking about taking speaker elements and throwing them out of phase and amplifying them by a certain amount more, you can play with phase and how that will combine with other sound waves coming out of other speakers to give the perception, or actually the placement of a sound, in an environment that is not directly in front of you. And and that's what Dolby's doing. So in order to get a correct playback system for your 914 Atmos system, you have to have speakers that are adequate and precise enough. You have to have power amps for those if they're not self-powered. consulting
and
with.
one of the benefits of a passive speaker where you have the amp separate is the speaker will be lighter in weight.
Yes.
So maybe
Oh,
easier
yeah.
to hang up on the wall and ceiling, right?
For sure. And also much smaller, size. You don't have an amplifier in it. So that's why another reason why I chose it, because I have a very narrow room. It's only 11 feet wide. So it's probably one of the smaller rooms at the time that Dolby, agreed to help me, plan for. And the placement of the speakers has to be very precise and has to be maintained. And it's not just pointed at your face. It has to be specific degrees and angles in order for it to that speaker to interact with the other speakers. If you're going to start using objects and placing things that aren't coming directly out of the one speaker, there's a lot of math involved, and there's a lot of places to make mistakes. And I made every single mistake you can make when I first started. And then I invented new mistakes, and I broke out. I helped with my prodigious ability to make mistakes. I've helped highlight flaws in the software at times. Like, well, we never thought anybody would be that stupid, but you're unique in your ability to make really, really stupid mistakes.
I'm probably doing one right now. I think I started with a stupid mistake on this podcast where I forgot to hit record and we had to start the intro over.
Push the red button. That's usually the first thing you got to do. So my journey to learning about Atmos began with Emily Lazar, encouraging me, cajoling me, shoving me, which I love her, and the feeling I hope is mutual. She's wonderful. But she really thought that I might be good at this. And it turns out, I think that she was right. And I've gone all in on it. And my cynicism about immersive sound, about quad or any of the other ways of using more than two speakers for stereo in a recording studio, all of that cynicism washed away when I heard Rocket Man. And I am just as thrilled today as I was in 2020. It's been 3 years, and I've been actively mixing Atmos for over 2 years now. And it's really, really cool. I prefer to listen to music through the Dolby Atmos software. I think that it's more high fidelity. It sounds better. Records I produce in stereo, like for Skating Polly, that I then do the Atmos mixes of, they're more fun to listen to in Atmos. I think there's something about not forcing two speaker boxes to carry the entire load of an entire mix of a band. I think there's something going on there. It's not a psychoacoustic thing. I think it's just physics. I think the physics of lessening the burden and putting it into other speakers, I think there's something for sure very tangible there. It can get really loud in here sitting in this position, but the perception of loudness is different. It's not as painful. You can get, oh my gosh, it's just really impressive. So from an acoustical engineering standpoint, this stuff goes way beyond, my NS10s and a Hafler 500 amp that I was working with in 1988. This is just better stuff. And it sounds great.
The S Series by Atom Audio, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors, blending advanced engineering and in-house design. With 5 models in various sizes and configurations, these monitors build on Atom Audio's iconic heritage while incorporating new technology for improved acoustic performance. The range includes the compact S2V with a 7-inch woofer, the 3-way S3H with twin 7-inch woofers, the vertical S3V with a single 9-inch woofer, and the powerful S5H and S5V main monitors featuring a 12-inch woofer and exceeding 131 dBSPL per pair. Despite differences in size and power, all these models provide highly analytical sound for professional audio applications. The S Series includes new woofers, mid-range drivers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine for crossover optimization. The result is accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail in bass and mid frequencies with wider frequency ranges, and forward-looking digital connectivity, all in a durable design. The S-Series ensures longevity in your studio, backed with a 5-year guarantee at atomaudio.com. There's a quality to enjoying records that also comes from familiarity. So sometimes there are qualities, for example, we might want to hear an old ribbon microphone and an old, tape sound on a production, not because it sounds better or worse than something else, but because it reminds us of something too. And I'm realizing that there's probably a fair amount of qualities of what sounds like an appropriate stereo recording and mix to us, some of which sounded great and some of which actually was just because that was the way to get it done. And so if we find ourselves listening to Atmos and, this future of what's possible with sound, and we keep trying to compare apples to apples, we might get a little frustrated when in fact, it's just a whole new world of possibilities. So, forget stereo for a moment and begin to absorb what's possible with this new configuration of stuff too. I don't know. That just popped into my head as like part of the experience of trying to understand this stuff. Another thing I was going to say when you were talking about objects, because we recently had Steve Genowick on here too, and so he started explaining a little bit about the beds and the objects. And I'm just reminded that it's good to think about objects, not like our first thought is, oh, it's this dot that you just wildly spin around a 3D space, or else you don't, or else why would you use it? And that's not necessarily the case, right? It can also be just a careful way to position a non-moving sound that just is, now you've carefully positioned everything like pan. You don't have to reach for a pan knob and make it go wow, 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 wow for it to be cool. I mean, that's what Hendrix did when they first busted it out. But
I do some wild panning for certain things. I've mixed a lot of catalog music, meaning music that I didn't produce that came out sometimes 40, 50 years before now. And I've done a lot of Christmas music. I've done a lot of Christmas songs for the band Pentatonics, the a cappella group. Like over 100 of them for them. And as is common in Christmas music, there's often a sleigh bell component, And if there's a sleigh bell, that usually means Santa. And where is Santa, when he's not busy working at the North Pole? But on Christmas Eve, he's up above you.
Right.
So the sleigh bells sometimes will kind of rotate around really slowly at a certain section. And, visually, if you're looking at it on the render, you'll see it spinning, but there's no visual component to that render with Apple Music or Tidal or Amazon.
You just basically put it in the chimney bed?
Put it in the chimney bed. But the sleigh bells sometimes will spin around there, like Santa would be, circumventing the globe. Is it circumventing the word? Yeah, he's
so.
he's heading
circumscribing.
He's heading. Yeah. He's heading across the globe in his miraculous ability to deliver toys to every good boy and girl. And
that's perfect.
It's really fun. I'll automate swoops and moves that the music will suggest.
That only a reindeer could do.
Right. But, I mixed the Atmos version of the upcoming Future Islands album, which is,
very cool record.
I'm a Future Islands fan, and this album is insanely good. It's a return to form. Not that they were off form. They just were experimenting with some other sounds and stuff. But it's an amazing record that really, I think, has taken to mixing in Atmos really well. It was a joy to mix, and it'll be out, I think, in January of 2024. But they're putting out singles, so they're adding songs kind of weekly, or they've got a program of putting out probably half dozen songs.
Well, it'll be out by as this podcast comes out, ittle be out.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, that was one of the notes I wrote. King of Sweden, Future Islands. I just wanted to ask you, like, how is mixing synths in Atmos different from other instruments? Is it a little bit more freeing because where does the synth live anyway?
That's actually a really good point. I think you're right. I think synthesizers are not real. They don't grow in trees, but neither do guitars and guitar amps. And you don't go out into the forest and pick a Telecaster off the Telecaster plant. I mean, you got to make all of these things.
It looks more like a tree limb at that point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, there are components of natural things, and maybe your synthesizer might have wooden sides on it if it's high quality synth. But all of what we're talking about is manufactured by us. None of this would happen. We're all talking about amplified sounds. And
well, Santa is real.
Yes, aside from Santa, everything we're talking about is a fantasy. So, okay. But synthesizers do tend to go places that maybe guitars won't when I'm mixing them. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. I tend to be fairly conservative on placement for drums and with vocals and with bass guitar or bass instruments, and the guitars and hand percussion and synthesizers tend to wander a little bit more. And synthesizers can go places. It's interesting. I don't know if that's because of the nature of the sound or because they're synthesizers. I don't know if that's has anything to do with an audio decision. It might just be, synthesizers are synthy and spacey, and they can go up and into the heights. I don't know.
Right.
I haven't thought about it.
Well, synths are great. I mean, I love all that stuff.
I
wish I had I'd like to have a whole nother life just so I can explore synths all the way. But the quality of sounds is it's everything from the sound of a drum to a bass to a lead to a pad to a atmospheric kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the other instrument, you already started talking about it, but the Pentatonics records, a couple of thoughts. One is you were talking about, you might be good at it mixing stuff that that wasn't typically in the wheelhouse of recording rock bands, indie rock bands and things like that. Did you record any of the Pentatonic stuff, or is that was all brought to you as, yeah, that's what I thought. But those mixes the Atmos mixes sound great. So you are great at that. And it made me think that a vocal ensemble like that might be another place where you can really take some liberties with placements of the voices as if you were sitting inside a vocal ensemble or a choir or, whatever. But you also mentioned being conservative with vocals. So what do you feel like are some of the balances of that for you?
When I say conservative with vocals, I think I should probably clarify by saying that in a traditional rock band setting where you might have a single lead vocalist and then maybe some background vocals at choruses or, various parts of the song. When you're talking about a cappella like Pentatonics, where it's a vocal group, multiple vocalists, or a choir where you might have 20 or 30 or 50 or, Mormon Tabernacle Choir, 70 plus people, then you're talking about more like an orchestral kind of, capture when you're recording it. And almost always you're coming from the audience perspective. And that does give you more leeway. So with Pentatonics as an a cappella group with 5 or more members usually, and usually a featured vocalist who might not be a member of the band, you might have 6 or more, and then overdubs, you can have a lot of vocals. So yeah, of course it's less conservative, but it's actually probably mixing an Atmos with these kinds of groups more like what you would experience when you'd see them perform live, which is why I think orchestral work is particularly compatible with Atmos and surround in general, immersive mixing, because that is how most of us will experience that. If we're in a concert hall listening to an orchestra, you might have a 109-piece orchestra performing. You're not going to mic every single instrument and then try to get a balance. That would be odd. you're probably going to do what almost every classical recording engineer has ever done when they're recording a large ensemble like that. You're going to probably try to capture it so that it sounds like it should sound when you're in the audience, not from the conductor's position, because that's a privileged place and very unusual. And certainly it's not going to be from the first cellist's position, because that person is, stage
got a weird mix.
Yeah, stage left and at the front of the stage, and you're going to hear mostly cello. So, and so there's, there are critics of Atmos and immersive mixing technologies that I'm afraid maybe have not given it enough thought about how people listen to music, and not just music, but how we listen every day as humans, as mammals. How we don't listen just with our two ears. Our the largest organ in our body, our skin, is perceiving and absorbing sound. The hair on our skin, on our arms, and on our head also acts as a receptor that our brain then collates and folds in with our ears. We perceive sound with our ears, not at the front. We do have front-oriented flaps of cartilage and skin that do pick up more sound that approaches from the front. But we hear sound from above us and from behind us, and it doesn't trigger fight or flight. If that was the case, then if your baby was crying behind you, you'd run in fear. We hear sound, we absorb sound in an immersive way. This is how we perceive sound, and we also, more important than fight or flight, which is a theory, not necessarily a proven thing. More important is the precedence effect, which is our brain's ability to assign precedence to sounds, especially sounds of equal volume. And I use this analogy all the time. I learned this in acoustical physics in college. Thank you, Dr. Rossing, R.I.P. So we might be having a conversation here where we're speaking at 87 dB, and there may be louder sounds outside my room. There might be the lawnmower, the guy making 110 dB worth of sound, and yet I can still hear what you're saying to me, Liz. You're talking to me, and my brain decides to ignore the louder sound in order to focus on the one that's more important. And I live under the flight path of the Burbank Airport. We're hearing sounds that might be equal distance, or miles, a mile and a half away, but they're on a takeoff pattern over my house all day long. But we've learned, because we're modern humans that have grown up with these sounds, to ignore the sounds of jets that might actually be quite a bit louder than our, like we're talking quietly to each other. But if one of those two jets on one of those planes going overhead is in distress, runs at even just a little bit higher RPM, or a lower one, or spluttering, we will stop what we're doing, because our brains will say, that's a giant jet that is exhibiting distress. And we will stop and go, did you hear that? And we'll run outside, we'll look in the sky, and we'll look for what's happening. Is that jet crashing? What's going on? That's happened to me so many times living in my house, working in my studio, where we'll be in a soundproofed room and a jet will pass by making an unusual sound. Or it'll be a jet, maybe like it'll sound like maybe it's David Geffen's private jet, because it sounds like a Learjet, and then people will stop. That's precedence effect. Our brain is assigning, order to things. So yes, things that are behind us, we tend to not pay as much attention to right away. But I think that's what's going on more than anything else. We absorb sound from all around us, from below us, not even our ears. And the stereo speakers is a crude attempt to play back what is essentially an immersive experience for humans. We don't, so people say immersive sound is not natural, or you shouldn't hear sound from behind you because you'll trigger a fight or flight thing. It'll make you anxious and nervous and set off, the opposite of endorphins. You'll get all these, adrenaline and stuff. That's just bullshit. Sorry.
What, adrenaline's never been good for music? Is that what they're saying?
No, no, they're not saying that. They're just saying that it's unnatural to perceive sound from any other sound source than in front of you. We
perceive sound from all around, yeah.
Yeah, yes. In fact, I would go so far to say that, a 914 system or a 20-10-50 system is more approaching every time you add more speakers, something that is actually more like how we actually listen. The most artificial of sounds are coming out of two speakers because it's only addressing what's directly in front of you. That's odd. That's really not natural at all. In fact, it's not how we even listen to two speakers because we're almost always in a room that's not an anechoic chamber that's also reacting with this. So the speakers come out, they pass, you hear them, they pass by you, they reflect off the walls beside you and behind you and come back again. And sometimes they can be almost the same level as the direct sound, the first wave that hits you coming out of the speaker box. But because of our brain's ability to assign importance and order with the precedence effect, we ignore all that stuff until it becomes so unpleasant that you can't, if you've got a problem with bass buildup behind you, or you've got highly reflective surfaces, then it becomes hard to actually, beyond just listening, casually, it gets hard to critically listen when you've got too much interference. Your brain can't suss all that out. It gets harder. Is that a really boring explanation or what?
No, that's great. Actually, that was great. And it reminds me that there is that difference between, or reminds us, there's that difference between critical listening and casual passive listening. And it's the reason why, the person that we're making the record for might be like, yeah, I don't know, I don't hear it. And it's driving us crazy when we're making records, Like trying to find the balance of those two things.
My wonderful wife has a hard time discerning individual instruments in a mix. She just sort of hears music as music.
Yeah, which is good because that's the reason we did ensembles in the first place.
That's right. Yeah, but I don't know that she could perceive a bass guitar part, within a mix of a band that's playing all at one time without a visual component. And I think she's found Atmos to be really exciting when she's come out here to listen to it because, Rocket Man pulls some of those sound elements in a way that, is easier for people who are not trained or don't have that genetic ability to parse. I don't know, really. I don't know that much about it. This is just a theory. I think it makes it easier for people to discern things that they might not have actually heard before because it was not necessarily lost in the mix, but it was, it was all coming out of these two speaker boxes or into their headphones, and it just was more of a challenge. I'm going to guess that people like you and I are good at our jobs in this field because my ability and your ability to discern, individual instruments in a stereo recording was innate. I know it was for me. I was able to tell that right away as a kid. And when I joined my first rock band at 15, I was quickly more or less the arranger of that band, because I was hearing all these other parts. And it turns out that some of the other people in the band maybe that wasn't available to them for whatever reason. I don't know that much about why that would be.
Yeah, I don't know. I know what you're talking about. I don't know how. I don't have a take on the innateness of it, but I do remember I had a music teacher in grade school who did the whole drop the needle thing on a record and would challenge us to pick out the instruments. So there was a little bit of training, and I enjoyed that stuff a lot. Of course, I didn't know what the hell a oboe and a clarinet was, but
for me, I started playing saxophone at 8 or 9 years old, and
we never gave you a shout out for playing sax in the band mentioned earlier,
that's okay.
Shrimp Boat.
That's all right. Yeah. I was the drummer in that band, but also played some soprano sax at times. But anyway, that was my instrument as growing up as a kid, and I joined the grade school orchestra back in those days. They had a wind ensemble back in grade schools, public grade schools in Illinois, and I was able to perceive all of the parts other people were playing. I could sing you the third trumpet part from a march, a Sousa march. I could predict it even. I could, I could just sing a fifth down and just sort of know that it was going to go to the leading, major seventh going into the next chord once I'd heard just enough of it. And that's been something I've had to learn isn't common, and I didn't have to be taught that. So when I picked up bassoon or oboe later on in high school, all I had to have was a reed and an instrument, just let me have it and give me a weekend to learn it. And then I'd just show up and start playing bassoon.
Wow.
And it's just, I'm that way with wind instruments, not trumpets, not brass instruments, but wind instruments. There isn't one made that I couldn't at that time just have a facility for, and also be able to understand the parts and harmony. I was, especially in high school, being in orchestra and wind ensemble and jazz ensemble, I was quickly arranging songs because I was hearing them all. Like it was not difficult for me to parse, but it took me a long time to understand that not everybody has that ability. And I don't know whether it's learnable.
You know what they say about bassoon, right? That the reeds are expensive, but college is free. Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. So, hey, speaking of an instrument that you did mention, well, let me just make this comment. What you described about being able to pick out all these sounds and everything, it occurs to me that has to be a massive strength, both in production, but particularly in mixing when mixes get complicated and complex. There are a lot of things to keep track of and to be noticing and constantly, adjusting for. So I imagine that's probably a helpful strength. But you had mentioned your wife coming in, you just talked about the bass, picking the bass out. And that was one of the comments or one of the questions I had written down about your Atmos mixes too. The Pete Yorn record, Ransom, has a really fat, round bass tone on it. And that record in general, it made me wonder and want to ask you if bass and that low stuff is a little bit of a tricky thing to figure out when you're mixing Atmos. And also just on the Pete Yorn record, why do you think all the tones are just so rich on that record?
Well, so that album's called Hawaii. I think that's the album that Pete asked me to mix.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And I did most of those songs in Atmos, and that's because Pete and I are old friends. We worked together on his first two albums, and we stayed pals ever since. And he'd been seeing on my social media and also maybe interviews and stuff, that I'm doing a lot of Atmos mixing. So his last record, they wanted someone to mix Atmos, and so they asked me to do it, which was great. It's beautifully recorded, mixed, and it was a joy to mix. And I can't tell you why those tones are rich and warm because they're just well recorded. And Pete has made a lot of records, and he knows how to get great sounds and comes up with cool parts. But when it comes to mixing bass with Atmos, you've got your subwoofer, the LFE, low frequency energy, I think, or I forget what E stands for in the LFE. Oh my God, sorry. Anyway, the subwoofer, the LFE.
Yeah. Maybe extension.
Low frequency extension. Yeah, maybe. Man, I'm blanking on it. But yes, you have to be careful about that, just like you would in any other situation where you have a subwoofer. You just have to, it's good to have it to know what's going on. You don't want to send a lot of things into your LFE that shouldn't ought to be there. So if you've got like a high string part, you might not want to send that to the LFE, because in your recording of a high violin solo, there may be an awful lot of super low, almost sub-audible frequencies that the LFE will happily amplify for you. And that might make your mix sound really muddy and confusing.
Now, do you have to selectively send something to the LFE, or does it, if you create something into an object, does it automatically hit the LFE and the speakers that you're pointing it at?
If you're mixing in objects, you have to set up your Pro Tools session so that you can send to an LFE. That's the way I do it. There's several different ways that you can set up an effective Atmos mix session in Pro Tools. You can also do it in Logic. I don't work with Logic, so I'm not familiar with how Logic does it, and I know that Luna is coming up with that, or may already have it, and I think Studio One
I think now has it.
They also have an Atmos authoring component now, but I don't mess with those formats. I only work with Pro Tools, and the way I've set up my Pro Tools template is that I have a separate aux that is for LFE, and so if one of my audio stems or tracks wants to have LFE, I have to assign it. I don't use the bed. There is an LFE bed, but I don't usually mix into the bed much. I usually use objects. I'm a fan of objects. So,
okay. And one of the things that we learned talking to Steve Genowick was...
Yeah, he's a master, by the way. Steve is literally ground zero for this.
Yeah.
He's so good at it, man.
Well, your mixes sound great too, man. So I think the process of using objects to direct your sounds in a mix maybe is a little more future-proof too, right? Is that fair way to think about it in terms of as the technologies adapt to reinterpret where, you know, what it means to render an Atmos mix into the speakers or the headphones, that it will hold its location. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I do think that Steve did point out that if you've got multiple speakers up on the ceiling or on the sides, it gives you a little more control of whether your sound is going forward or right next to you or toward the back, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Steve's right. I haven't given it much thought about future-proofing, as you know, in regards to objects versus the bed. I
don't know if he said the future-proofing thing or if I just interpreted it that way.
Oh, okay. Dolby, has smartly, in their package of metadata, in their software, will allow you to downmix, and so you can hear what it sounds like with your 914 system or a 714 or a 5.1 all the way down to 2.0, which is essentially two speakers, which is stereo. So,
and headphones.
Headphones or just out of a stereo speakers, pair of stereo speakers. And in the Dolby renderer software, you can toggle through that and listen to what it sounds like. And there are some of us mixing, myself not included yet, where they're actually mixing in Atmos and then deriving the stereo mix while in Atmos using the 2.0 like down mix. It's a time saver, I think, for classical and jazz stuff. It's clearly a smart move. I have yet to produce a record where it was all happening in the Atmos, realm, and then derived the stereo mix. Although I'm starting to think, man, I want to give it a shot. I just don't know when I'll do that, since a lot of what I'm doing is mixing Atmos for other people's productions. So so there's already a stereo mix, that's already been done. That the album was delivered and finished prior to me ever getting the call to do anything with Atmos. So, but I'm excited about that.
I guess we've learned that the idea of creating a record in Atmos presents a challenge in terms of latency.
Oh, you can't do it right now.
Right. So you just can't quite do it yet unless you're I guess if you're programming a record in Atmos, then the latency is less of an issue than if you're trying to, hit a chord and hear it back in the headphones at the same time.
I know that some people are doing it. I have not put a lot of effort into learning about it. And I'm assuming at some point it'll get better, but the latency is extreme right now, at least is the way I run Atmos. But what I have done is, we're working on a song and with a particular artist, and we'll get to a point where we have enough stuff recorded in the regular Pro Tools session. Well, let's just pull that stuff now into the Atmos session. So you close that down, change my settings so that I can use my 914 system, and change, open up the renderer, have it sync up with Pro Tools, and change my I/O settings and playback engine. Open up Pro Tools again, an Atmos session, and then I import that audio in. It takes a couple of minutes. It's almost it's not instantaneous, but yeah, the sounds have to be sort of already recorded. They don't have to, sort of. They actually have to be. Like I don't have that capability yet. I imagine that at some point it will be a possibility, and that will be really exciting. But I'm not there yet. And if some people are doing it, I bet it's not the kind of music that I mostly get hired to record, which is less with programming and more real instruments and microphones. It's not difficult to switch back and forth with my setup. I wanted as much flexibility as possible, so I don't have a dedicated, Atmos mix room. I have a hybrid. I can still do my full stereo, album productions, and I can switch over. Usually, again, it takes about 3 minutes for me to switch from stereo over to Atmos or back again. It's really just a couple of patches in the patch bay. I just have to, I don't have to reboot the computer or anything. I just, I swap out the Dadman templates, from stereo to Atmos. It again takes about 3 minutes total. So that's enough time. Someone goes and gets a cup of coffee or, has a snack, goes to the bathroom, and I'll be ready in Atmos. So
yeah, that's faster than it used to take us to restart the regular old Pro Tools computer anyway.
Oh, it's way faster than, hey, I want to work on this other song. Let's fast wind, the 2-inch 24 track off and put up the correct reel. That could take a long time.
But it doesn't, but it lacks that smell of oxide that
that's
makes
right.
The studio smells so good. All right. So let me ask you this. Some of the stuff you're doing, like working with Liz Phair, those are examples where you created the record, have done the stereo mix, and you're mixing it in Atmos, so you're sort of doing all aspects of this stuff. And didn't you mention that she's also going around recording some, she's now getting into the concept of binaural sounds and all that kind of stuff too?
Long before we started this record, I mean, we're talking 10 or 15 years ago, she had a binaural head type of thing. Basically like headphones with two microphones. I haven't seen this thing that she's got, but Ted White, who's at PMC now, used to engineer for her, and I think that he either loaned it to her or got it for her. But it's a recording device that is mounted, on her ears, and she goes around doing field recordings all the time. She's been doing it for years. She's just that way. She's always been like that. Always. She listens immersively, like smoke a bowl, put the headphones on, and then get lost. I mean, she's really good at that, at just getting completely lost in whatever she's listening to.
I just sort of Googled that, and like there's all kinds of options coming up. And I remember seeing, Rockstars, if you're curious about this stuff, there are super cheap ones you can get on Amazon too, to just they're almost like earbuds that are microphones, and you just start with recording with those just to see what it sounds like.
So so long before I was working in Atmos, she was capturing these sounds. And if you listen to her Soberish album from 2021, there's vignettes, there's a whole scene that she had me put together along with her, where there's the sound of a motor scooter, a Vespa scooter, specifically had to be a Vespa scooter because this coincided with some memories of an experience she had with a suitor, with a friend, and she wanted to recreate that experience, and she wrote a song about that experience. So the song Sheridan Road, I think it is, starts out with the sound of Vespa, heading down what's supposed to be Lakeshore Drive, and then getting off Lakeshore Drive, and had to last a certain amount of time, and then we have to hit the exit at Michigan Avenue, and then there has to be the downshifting, and we went through public domain stuff online, YouTube and stuff, looking for the right sound of downshifting Vespas. She's like, well, it's going to be him driving, and me as a passenger, so it has to be, I remember it being like, we weren't going at a high rate of speed. It wasn't a motorcycle, it was a Vespa, and we were like hauling ass on that Lakeshore Drive, wee, like she's like, I thought the motor was going to explode because there's two of us on this small little scooter.
Lakeshore Drive's scary. I mean, it's like a 5-lane,
right?
Beast.
I know it's a formidable stretch of road. So, and then it's like down Michigan Avenue and then down a side street and then pulls up and parks, and it's in a hotel, and she wanted this whole. I don't know.
The Drake.
I don't. It could have been the Drake.
Yeah,
that's the right area. That's good. So, long story short is there's also a rainstorm component because there was a huge menacing thunderstorm, and that's why they were speeding like demons to get back to the hotel they're staying in because they didn't want to get caught in the storm on a scooter. So then we had to go find all this thunder sound, and rolling thunder sounds really different when it's Lake Michigan. I mean, epic storms, right? You've lived there. It's intense. And so it had to be a certain kind of thunderstorm. And it took us days to put this together back in 2019 when we were doing this. And again, this is before Atmos, but she wanted it to sound like it's a storm rumbling from around you, because that's not directional usually, storms that low end like that is omnidirectional. So, those giant, it was very important for her to have this be as immersive as possible. So when it came time to mix this album in Atmos a year later, it was just a thrill because she'd already dictated and programmed, these immersive sounds into what was a stereo thing. And she was constantly pushing me to make it sound more immersive in the stereo plane.
So that begs a question. Can you reverse encode a sound in Atmos mixing? So if a sound starts as a binaural recording, will Atmos reverse render it to hit all the speakers all around you in an Atmos playback setup? Or does a binaural recording kind of stay binaural at this point in working in Atmos? I think they call that upmixing. There's all kinds of plugins now and software you can use to do an upmix that'll put it into like literally every speaker and analyze it and help you do that. Personally, I don't use those very often because I find that to be the effects are less than good for me.
Okay. But that might reflect more my old man cynicism than anything else. But upmixing is getting better, I guess. And again, it's program dependent. There's other tricks you can use. There's reverbs that you can put into various speakers and various effects that will, for sound effect stuff, is really, really good at that. It's a case-by-case basis. I have a template, again, a mixing template in Pro Tools for Atmos with, I think I've got 6 different reverbs and delays that are already in certain spaces, and I almost never use them as I've got them in the template. Every song is different. So it really depends on the program, like anything else, like we were talking about kick drums. It really depends on the song and the player as to what I'm going to use. But you can do some predicting, and so that's what a template is for me in Atmos. Is I'm going to predict, certain reverbs are going to be in the back here, but some will be up front, some will be up in the heights. But then I'll also do things like duplicate a track that might have a background vocal, and I'll filter out all but the, a very specific frequency, like using a comb filter, and then affect that and put that in certain places to make more immersive the experience without it interfering with what is supposed to be a faithful rendition of the stereo mix that was originally done. So
we've been going for a while, so we can wrap up soon. But this question I did write down, and I'm reminded of it when you talk about these reverbs and spaces in different places, and it's kind of a combination, because one of my questions was, how is mixing vocals in Atmos a little different from stereo, and then specifically all the choices skating poly. I believe there was that song was the vocal and space around it at the beginning, sort of like a verse before the bigger verse kicks in.
That's right.
And it just sounds really intimate. But then I'm listening in the AirPod Pros, and also I'm thinking like, yeah, but this sounds like I hear this much space around it, even though it's intimate and not exaggerated. So I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about creating space around vocals in an Atmos mix, and is that part of the thinking of the process?
Well, that Skating Poly record was an album that I produced, so I had leeway to take liberties with where I place things that I might not do with someone else's production. If I'm mixing, like for instance the number one,
the Soul Asylum.
Soul Asylum, yeah, absolutely, Soul Asylum. So my goal, my job is to make it sound like the record, and Andy Wallace's mix of Runaway Train. It's going to sound like Andy Wallace mixed it. I'm not here to reinvent the wheel or to add my tastes. It's an egoless pursuit as far as I'm concerned. That is not my job, and I don't think I'd be doing catalog work like that for a record that important if I were insistent on putting my own thumbprint on there. I've had plenty of opportunities to do my thing. This is not one of those opportunities. I'm here to be faithful to what was done prior, unless the artist tells me otherwise. But that hasn't happened yet. So, but when it comes to vocals,
to something like Skating Poly, where you have the freedom to do that.
All right, yeah. So I've got Peyton singing that song, and she's close mic'd when we recorded it. And I think, if I remember correctly, I'm using a plate reverb with the Altiverb plugin, and that's just stereo left-right. So what I'm doing is I'm keeping her probably in the stereo front, maybe pulled out a little bit from stereo left-right, maybe, but probably not. I'm sending into the center speaker a little bit, but that reverb is probably, I'm going to guess, I printed it separately, and that's going to be in the rears or somewhere sort of behind you. Additionally, I'll put a touch of a really sort of long reverb, a long decay time that has very little character, kind of almost like flavorless. It's usually a Sound Toys plugin or another Altiverb, or maybe even oh gosh, I'm spacing on the name of it now. Valhalla has a couple of really great reverbs that are they don't impart a lot of character, but they can put a lot of length in there, So this way I can preserve the spirit of the original stereo mix, but get things up and around a little bit. That's probably what I did with that particular song. And then when the background vocals that Kelly sings, she comes in when the drums kick in, she goes, "Ow, ow," and those are coming out of the sides a little bit. I get more adventurous with background vocals. But in general, lead vocals in a rock band, I'm pretty faithful to sticking to the stereo front. I mean, I just, part of it's a visual thing. When you're seeing a band play, you've got the singer sort of front and center. That's, some of it's dictated by that. And that might just be something that a future generation of Atmos mixers or artists working in Atmos in real time might discard that completely. But that's where I'm at currently.
So the way that we can think about this is we might have a vocal that is it's panned up the center of the left-right speakers, or it could be sent directly to the center speaker up front.
Yeah, I never do that. I never send a vocal only through the center.
Okay.
Center is, I treat the center speaker as supplemental, not as primary for any sound. I've never delivered an Atmos mix that I was successfully able to get the center to carry all of the weight. It is seasoning to taste.
Okay. This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins and Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. Is the center speaker just uniquely challenging in that way?
It just doesn't sound good.
There you go. Well, it's the only speaker. I mean, it is sort of like the redheaded stepchild of the Atmos speakers, because if you think about it, it's the only one that is a single. Everything else is, could be a left-right pair or whatever. And it's
except maybe the sub, the sub. But the sub is kind of special. It's,
or if you had, single sides or something like that.
I think I remember hearing Bob Clearmountain say that he relies on the center a lot. He'll put like all of the lead vocal through the center. And I was just like, wow, okay. And of course, nobody's going to argue with the quality of his Atmos mixes are phenomenal, right? So, but Bob basically can do anything.
He's Bob.
So he's Bob. Bob does amazing work all the time. But I find I'm oftentimes working with stereo stems. So I'll have a stereo lead vocal, and we've already got a center that's very clearly defined coming out of those two speakers, left, right. So the center is, the center always poses a challenge for me, and I lean into the center more when I'm listening to the AirPod Pros playing back the Apple Music spatial experience, which is taking the Dolby metadata and audio and adding their own special sauce, and then giving the listeners something that's neither, beast nor fowl, or whatever they call it. It's a hybrid of the Dolby Atmos, audio, and also
it's
Apple's own idea.
Kind of a binaural down mix is, I guess.
Yeah, they're using
it might not even be technically strictly binaural.
It's not. It's the DD plus jock file that, so again, this package of audio that's delivered with Dolby Atmos, it's massive. The file sizes are huge. There's a lot of stuff that's in there. It's, every opportunity to down mix and listen, depending on what the consumer's listening, system is, and it'll downsize or expand out to whatever's appropriate for what the listening device is. And but within that, there's different files types, and so Apple's using the DD plus jock. We don't have to get too technical about it, which is good because I get lost pretty easily. But I find that the center channel is often something that I will need to compensate for what I'm hearing when I audition the MP4, file that, I bounce that out. I put it onto my iPhone. I listen to the AirPod Pros. I have to. Every mix has to be approved. It's like the old days when you would mix onto a 1/4 inch or whatever, and then you would make a cassette or a CDR, and you'd run out to your car. Or if you were one of those people that had a little FM transmitter, you'd go out to your car and transmit it into your car stereo, but it's time consuming. Mixing in Atmos is time consuming compared to stereo, and it ought to be, because you have to listen to the physical renderer, which is my 914 system. I have to audition and make sure that the 714 and the 5.1 and the quad and the 2.0 and the Apple Music spatial experience with headphones and AirPods all sounds good. That's how many of those is that? And that takes time. And you have to print the renderer. You have to print your mix before you can, just like the old days, you have to print your mix before you can burn the cassette and go listen to it in the boombox. You know, some people were smart.
Technically, I think what you list is technically 9.1.4. Forget about it.
Yeah, it goes on. And there are ways to listen to in real time something that approximates the AirPod spatial Apple experience. That's using Logic with a dedicated computer. And friends of mine are doing that. And maybe that's something that when I get a break, maybe in January of this next year, when it's post-holidays, I'll dive into that, because it would cut the time down a little bit. But Apple is always updating their OS, their iOS. And I think they've been doing a lot of it lately. They're doing like 6 iOS updates a year. There's just another one just last week. Sometimes it's security. Sometimes it has to do with music or other things. But I think a lot of times they are kind of constantly tweaking
the audio stuff.
And so keeping up to date with that is dependent on, you'd have to keep your Logic software up to date. Everything has to be fresh. So but there's a lot of discussion about the delivery, the changing format, the changing environment of delivery for Apple Music. It's a challenge. It's fun and interesting, and it can be a little aggravating at times.
Well, I guess as engineers, as mixers, one of the first things we have to learn is how to create a mix that hopefully works well for everybody everywhere, when you can't really know or control where and how they're going to listen to it. So that's sort of what Atmos is still. And hopefully we've got that thick skin.
It's always been like that, though. But I will say this, like, when I started in the 80s, I had to have a mono speaker, right? You had to have the Horatone mono speaker, because
the Horatone.
Yeah, Horatone. And you'd have to collapse your mix down. I mean, you don't have to do any of it, but you'd be smart to collapse your mix down to a crappy little mono speaker, because that's what not just car audio still was. A dashboard, upward-facing dashboard single speaker was still pretty common in 1988. But more common was car audio that had stereo, rudimentary stereo, sometimes nice sounding, but still 2 speakers for stereo. And by 1988, but really what was common was a mono speaker in your TV. So people would have a TV that would have a single speaker mounted at the bottom. It wasn't stereo most of the time in 1988. It was still a mono speaker. So if you're working on music that might potentially come out of a speaker for a TV show or used for a commercial, you had to hear it, if you're going to do your best work. So
I still do that now, not because I'm worried about the TV speaker, but because I think it does help me.
Well, collapsing to mono,
sure. On the Avant tone,
right?
Which doesn't rhyme with horror anymore, unfortunately. But,
for real.
I just find it helpful in listening at low volume and judging mid-range balance. And
yes, I concerned myself until Atmos. I had evolved away from giving much concern to these various playbacks, because playback has mostly gone to headphones, AirPods, and really nice car stereos that might have EQ on bass just jacked. So, having a useful subwoofer was really important. Back in the early 2000s, I was compelled to go and buy one, because car audio oftentimes has a sub, or it has somebody, going in and tweaking that low end, so it's massive. So, but I stopped worrying about so many potential playback options, right? I don't have to think about cassette anymore. I don't have to worry about CD. Boomboxes are a thing of the past. cassette boom boxes haven't existed since like the mid 90s. They just don't exist. Walkman aren't around anymore. What you're listening to is, your phone or your car, and that's kind of it. And so Atmos is reminiscent of an earlier time when you had to think about all these potential playback systems. So now I'm thinking about sound bars, and I'm thinking about home kit, home pods, and Sonos systems, and the 9-1, the giant array. Car audio is going to be coming online hopefully really soon, because I think that's really where the potential lies, where you're sitting in a fixed position, you've got an array of speakers already around you. So I am taking more time checking my mixes on all these different potential playback systems. And is it a bit of a pain? Yes, it is. But is it really a new thing? No, it's just a return to how we all had to deal with it. And back in the old days, I would print my regular mix. Like, for instance, for Liz Phair's Exile In Guyville, I have a DAT still of safeties of the CD that was going to go to be mastered by Roger Seibel at SAE. So there's the CD DAT. There's the cassette DAT, where I made EQ changes based on optimizing it for cassette. There's also the vinyl, right? Where it's not as wide stereo. I didn't want Roger to have control over that. I wanted to collapse the stereo image a little bit so that I could get a deeper groove cut and sort of take that burden out of his hands, that decision. And I would, for important records where there was a budget, I would print 3 separate masters of an album before it even would go to be mastered. So, is this like some weird gobbledygook, and now we've got all these different speakers and we're all doing it so that speaker manufacturers can sell more speakers and make more money? There's an aspect of truth to that. Absolutely. But there is no natural stereo speaker system. This is all fake. This is all just our desire to hear sound and music in a variety of ways. We all own a variety of, in the Western world, speaker arrays. We have home stereos. We have sound bars underneath our home stereos. We have our car audio. We have our AirPods. We have our headphones. We have Bluetooth speakers. We have the one that, the speaker that we use, the radio in the kitchen in the morning. I mean, we're all using multiple playback things. And you could say, if you wanted to be cynical, that we really only need one. We don't need to have 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different ways to listen to audio, but most of us own all of those things. And in some ways, we are all, victims of being marketed to. But I'm just not that cynical. I am in the audio business. I'm in the business of helping, make music that gets played back over and over and over again. And the playing field is constantly evolving and changing. And right now, the largest company in human history, the most valuable company as far as Apple, is stopping its, onward march to making everything sound like crap and making us comfortable with just listening to sound just off of our iPhones and not actually having sonically good stuff. They've stopped that for the moment and said, hey, you know what? Really good playback and fidelity is actually kind of important. Consumer, you should be paying attention to this. I think that's wonderful, because that's the first time that's happened in my career. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it's cool, man. It really is exciting. Well, and it's been cool to hear you just share your story of mixing an Atmos in your studio and also just talk about your process. So I want to say thank you very, very much, Brad, for coming and joining us on the podcast again. Wonderful to have you back. I guess the last time was years ago when you were on the show. So great to have you back. I'll ask you the same closing question I asked you last time, though. This one's hypothetical, and we get to take the Wayback Studio machine. You go back in time a ways and you find younger Brad and say, nice hair, Brad. And then you also say, and by the way, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to be thinking about to be a rock star of the studio yourself. I don't know what stage in your journey you want to go back to. Is it way back, or is it just before you got into all this new Atmos mixing? But what advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
Based on my experience working on some classic records that I've been asked to mix in Atmos, I would tell my younger self to try to find a way to listen to the multi-tracks of older records that you didn't have anything to do with. So if that means, befriending the owner of a studio in downtown Chicago who might have some old, records by Chicago, or by, maybe they've got some Dinah Ross Supremes, multi-tracks, try to listen to multi-tracks of classic records and listen to those individual instruments. Because that's been something I'm sad about. Like 60-year-old me is going, man, I wish I would have had access to these sounds in 1988 when I was 20 something years old, because man, is it educational. Like the sounds of drums recorded in 1966, the amount of distortion on these things.
Yeah.
like the aggressiveness of mixing choices, like just, wow, they're turning things up really loud. There's crispiness. There's a lack of low end. There's a lot of low end. There's all these different things that my timid 20-something self could have used that experience. I didn't do any mentoring. I wasn't an intern for years and years and years and learning the ropes. I did very little of that, and then we opened our own studio immediately. So I would tell my 20-something old self in 1988, go out and find these. Of course, it's pre-internet, right? And now I can find them, all over the place. But back then, you'd like somehow get your hands on classic albums, multi-tracks, and just listen to them. You don't have to like manipulate them. Just listen to just the sound of the drums and just the sound of the bass guitar, because that would have helped speed up my process of becoming a better engineer.
And back then, I guess that was really the experience of getting into a studio as an assistant with a mentor, maybe somebody who would let you see what was going on. And it was a little bit of a challenge. Like if you wanted to do your own thing, you kind of sometimes felt like it's either or. You're either doing your own thing or you're assisting people somewhere.
Right.
So it's great that we have access to this stuff through the internet and other things. And who knows, maybe to say the words artificial intelligence again, maybe it'll just be able to extract all the individual sounds from things in the future, and you can just listen and go like, that's what it sounded like.
Oh, wow.
So Brad, tell the rock stars, how can they find you now? Where would you like them to go? What if they're ready to mix their next great masterpiece in Atmos and they need to get in touch with you?
Oh, you can find me on Instagram. I'm no longer on. I have a Facebook page, but I don't use it. It's just a placeholder. But 100% of my internet, activity, social media activity is on Instagram. So it's Brad Wood _ producer, and that's where you'll find me. Anybody can follow me. I post fairly regularly, and there's also in there you can see my bio. In my bio there's like a LinkedIn, to my website. My website is bradwoodmusic.com, and I have to update that as well. That's been languishing a little bit, but there's email links to my manager and to myself there. And I'm using Threads more and more and more. I'm no longer on Twitter because that got to be just a tedious and annoying. So I'm no longer on Twitter. So it's Threads and Instagram, and that's kind of it. I'm not a TikTok guy, but you know what? Instagram's turning into TikTok slowly, so I don't really need to be on TikTok anymore.
That's funny.
I have a LinkedIn profile. I don't use that either, but if you want to make a professional, a contact with me, you can always find me there. I will respond to those, but I don't do messaging and stuff. If you find me on Instagram, you want to send me a message, I'll see that request fairly frequently. I'm pretty good about staying up to date on that.
Cool.
So there you go. Yeah.
Well, it's great for you to be so accessible. So thank you for that. And Brad, thanks for being on the podcast with us again, man. And Rockstars, thanks for listening.
I appreciate you having me back. I love what you do, and it's been a while since I've done a podcast, an interview like this, and I think like a lot of people, starting in 2020, not just with the pandemic, but with Black Lives Matter and sort of some of the social upheaval, I found it important for me to sit down and watch and listen as opposed to talk. And if it weren't for Atmos and my delving into this world, I don't know that I would do a follow-up interview like I've done today, because I feel like it's good for me to listen more and observe about not just audio things, but really the larger world. There's an ability to have a hot take about every particular issue, and I just don't know, as an aging white male with every possible advantage given to me by birth here in America, I don't know if my hot take on every single thing is helpful. But what is helpful is for me to listen more and be an ally where I can, but not necessarily have to talk about it, feel compelled to talk about it. So having Atmos as a new thing that's exciting for me has been my way sort of maybe to get back into this. And I'm really excited to have it, they have the opportunity to talk to you again about it.
Well, it's awesome. Well, we love listening to you. So thanks for giving us something to listen to too.
All right. So cool. Well, take care.
Brad, good to see you, man. I look forward to seeing you around the studio, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you out in California on the West Coast.
Yeah, NAMM soon. When is it? It's early this next year, or is it in the spring?
Yeah, January. This will come out after that, but so Rockstars, we will already have given each other a high five, hopefully.
Cool. I'll see you there then. All right.
All right, man. Cheers.
Take care, Rockstars. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Liz Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. Lewitt, Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support the show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're gonna help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.